They watched the world end. Four figures, looking down from above, safe in their tower, away from the spike's influence. They had stood here, watching, waiting, as the spike slowly grew. But the spike was just the beginning. As it grew, the world began to change. The sky glowed a deep green, and the rivers ran with mercury. And still, the figures watched, unmoving, silent vigils, looking down on a world that had annexed what once was Earth. And in the spike's wake, the few surviving humans were left to rebuild civilization in this new world. The city was a corpse, its buildings unnatural bones jutting from the ground, like the remains of some long-dead giant. Wires flowed from building to building, like long tendrils of decaying tissue. The city was an imitation of life in a world where nothing lived. As Tyson McHenderson walked through the crowded, dimly lit streets, the buildings around him groaned under their own weight. They had been built after the spike rose, using the few natural resources left. But the buildings did not collapse, standing firm, stretching into the sky like the hand of some monster back from the dead. Yet, in this grim place, everyone was perfect and happy. Those who weren't simply vanished, not only physically, but from the memories of those who knew them. High in their tower, the four figures watched Tyson, just a grain of sand on a vast beach, nearly identical to everyone around him. Yet still the figures watched, quiet and motionless. As Tyson continued through the narrow alleys and dark roads, he noticed the cameras of the city turned to him, and him alone. They were not surveying the masses. They were watching him, like the eyes of some terrible creature, ready to devour him and anything or anyone that knew him. Tyson turned onto a different street. He had to get away from those cameras, those horrible cameras. But as he rounded the corner, he found himself on the same street that he was just on. He tried to turn again, but found himself on the same street as before. However, this time was different. The cameras, those horrid cameras, they were no longer metal and wire. They were eyes, still dripping with blood, as if they had just been torn from some poor soul's body. As Tyson looked around, the crowd parted for him, and he looked at their faces. All of their eyes were gone, leaving hollow, empty sockets. Tyson quickened his pace, speeding up, trying to get as far from these horrors as possible. But he could not escape them, for no one could see, none except Tyson and the four figures. Eventually, Tyson found himself nearing a massive tower at the heart of the city, taller than any other buildings around it. The bloodied masses converged behind him, advancing forward, forcing him towards the tower. As he moved, the people around Tyson became more and more disfigured, their bodies being claimed by the city. Their nerves melded with the flowing wires. The building's concrete supports replaced with flesh and bone. The pipes and valves became arteries and veins, and the water they carried morphed into the people's blood. When Tyson reached the tower's base, the city and everything in it was completely unrecognizable. The abominations that used to be his friends and co-workers surged behind him, forcing him into the single small door in the tower. Once Tyson was inside, he began to rise as an elevator carried him upward. As he silently waited, he felt his mind go numb and started to lose control of his thoughts as the monstrosity that once was the city reached into his brain, trying to assimilate him and gain control, just as it had done to everyone else. Suddenly, Tyson snapped out of the strange trance. He would not succumb to this terrible perversion of reality. As if in response to his defiance, the city roared with the mouths of thousands of disfigured demons. With a beep, the elevator reached the top floor, and the doors opened to a horrifying sight. The four figures, still turned, watching the city, were split open, their nerves trailing between each other, connecting to the tower walls in a gruesome display. Without looking at Tyson, The figures began to speak in unison. But it was not normal speech. The figures' voices emanated from the walls of flesh around them, as if the city itself was speaking. It spoke of bringing life to this empty world, of becoming gods and creating new life. It talked for hours, and somehow Tyson could not bring himself to ignore it. He was rooted in place, forced under its command. At last, the city stopped, and its thousands of eyes turned towards Tyson. After several moments of silence, it spoke.
At last, we live again. Join us, and you too may regain life.
Tyson felt his mind buckling under the city's pressure, straining to hold on to his independence and control. But at last, his will broke, and his mind gave up, acquiescing to the city's every demand. He felt tendrils of nerve and tissue reaching from the walls and slithering through his skin to the flesh below. His brain joined the four figures, and they became one. One being, one mind, made from the bodies of many. Though forged from the death of thousands, this new entity was alive, truly alive in this world where nothing lived. Though humanity had fallen, a new form of life had risen in its place, a horrible amalgamation of machine and flesh.